Now, may I invite Abdul Musa to present his thoughts on making sense of hybrid cloud. Abdul is the CTO at CoCreate. Abdul, welcome to the CIO Summit today. And now over to you.
Jonathan, thank you so much, and thank you to all the viewers that have joined this conference. I think there's quite a lot of myths in the industry and a lot of confusion around where hybrid cloud adds value. And the discussion points today is around making sense of where hybrid cloud fits in, what are the business benefits, and how these elements of hybrid cloud can actually help transform business. There's a lot of talks about digital transformation, and it's a buzzword, and hybrid cloud seems to be intertwined within these phrases. We find ourselves, possibly with the pandemic, in a very volatile space. A lot of businesses have been disrupted. We find a lot of industries specifically are looking at new ways of how to engage customers. And in a nutshell, we find this concept that we call VUCA: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And these are major factors driving change within businesses. Unfortunately, not all businesses have been born off the internet, like some of the successful startups and unicorns, but we find ourselves with traditional business that's still operating where evolution needs to take place. And everybody has come up with the concept where something needs to change. Unfortunately, you cannot continue doing the same thing and expect a different outcome. And that is critical in terms of where digital transformation finds itself. There seems to be confusion around what digital transformation is. And most people think digital transformation is a solution that you buy off the shelf, you flick a switch, and the next day your business is transformed. Unfortunately, it's not that. And what I deem as digital transformation is a process and an approach to achieve a specific outcome or business outcome utilizing technology. And there's some typical examples. Most businesses are familiar with this, but just to reiterate, most companies are looking at how they can become more profitable, how they can engage customers in a better way to improve customer experience, how they can create advanced competitiveness. And these outcomes that businesses are trying to achieve underpinned by technology, we see as true digital transformation. That begs the question around how does hybrid cloud, digital technologies, processes, people transformation actually fit into this entire ecosystem? And that is where we're getting to the crux of the understanding and making sense of what we're speaking about today. So you'll find something called the digital operating map, and it's quite a busy slide. There's plenty of technologies that you see on this. And these are typical buzzwords that a lot of organizations are engaging into with various providers of these technologies. Massive investments have gone into these areas from a couple of years ago. I think a lot of these concepts were what we call airy-fairy. It was conceptual and not really believed in terms of what these technologies could do. But just going back to the new business models in terms of companies born off the internet, a lot of those companies have invested in these technology areas and built their business models based on these technologies. And this is typically where a lot of the public cloud providers have invested their money and their R&D. Unfortunately, we find in the legacy world where customers have invested in existing information systems that they're using to operate in a legacy world or in a traditional business sense, these technologies have very little play in terms of influence around their business models. Introducing these technology changes the way that businesses interact, and cloud providers have moved into this paradigm to ensure that businesses can leverage these things effectively to rapidly accelerate the transformation. Unfortunately, it is a maturity curve, and not everybody's at the same maturity level and the same levels of complexity in terms of transforming the business. But just understanding those three maturity models. So at the very infancy, we talk about creating a digital operating model. That's a concept to understand how these technologies can actually fit into your company to make a difference. The next step to that is how technologies can actually move into a space where the enterprise is intelligent, leveraging the tech, and ultimately you're going to find yourself where you classify your organization as a tech-driven company. A tech-driven company is where you're purely using technology to evolve your business. It's easier said than done, and I'd like to just explain a practical approach on how you can use hybrid cloud to adopt these technologies. And this is what we deem as hybrid cloud to digitally transform. This typically fits into a maturity model based on where customers are from their complexities, existing investments, their thought process to achieve specific outcomes, as I illustrated at the beginning of the presentation. So at the very infancy, we talk about modernizing of platforms to support hybrid cloud. Many organizations are still in firefighting mode, meaning that technology is sort of something where the lights need to be kept on just to drive the legacy world of applications that business processes rely on. Unfortunately, in that model, you can't be innovative, and IT is merely seen as a support function. Moving on from that, we talk about the consumption of traditional public cloud services. And this is where innovation starts taking place. Applications and services are natively developed to use what's available on cloud platform services. It doesn't immediately add immense value to the business itself, but it adds somewhat to the stability of what's been developed and available to utilize from a business point of view. We then talk about how do we move into this digital arena to start adopting the people transformation aspects to leverage technology. And that is in the space where you look at what is core to your business and what is not core. The non-core IT-related services, which is typically the platforms, the cloud to support mundane applications, we recommend that customers outsource those services and convert and transform personnel into a digital services-orientated approach, understanding how do I use data, how do I use analytics, how do I use AI, how do I use machine learning to transform the business models. And that's where we move into what we call pure business transformation. That is where we harness the entire and complete power of what the public cloud is providing. Bearing in mind that legacy will not just fall away. So in the first quadrant, private cloud, large monolithic applications, in some form or the other, they will still exist. But being able to integrate this ecosystem across public cloud and private cloud is where the true value of hybrid cloud comes into play. Because you still need to accelerate transformation, and you don't have the ability or even time and capability to completely rewrite applications at a whim. But the cloud providers have introduced this concept of hybrid cloud, where you can plug these digital technologies into what you've got in your existing legacy landscape, and using this maturity model allows you and enables you to rapidly accelerate. More importantly, however, is cybersecurity. So whether you're running in a private or public cloud, security needs to be top of mind and integrated natively into your strategy. And that is a principle that we tell all customers, including ourselves, that keep that as top of mind, embedded and integrated as a principle and not as an afterthought. More importantly, legislation and compliance is very important throughout this entire framework. I'd like to say thank you for listening, and hopefully that's been informative, and it's a practical approach and clarifying what hybrid cloud adds as a value proposition to the business. Jonathan, thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to you.
Thank you, Abdul. Some really interesting information in there. Ladies and gents, once again, I'd like to urge you to join the discussion. You can post your questions in the Q&A box, and you'll stand a chance to win an e-shopping voucher. Abdul, we have had some questions come in that I'll direct to you now. Starting off with a request for an example, can you give us an example where technology is being used effectively to transform a legacy business model, as you described?
Thank you for that question. I think everybody's quite au fait with the retail industry. And if we go back probably a decade or two ago, I was fortunate enough to travel the globe, so I've been to quite a number of countries. Just landing in the United States, as an example, there was a massive retail chain store called Macy's. And that was sort of a key point when everybody landed in New York, visit Macy's. You had a walk around, you do quite a bit of shopping, and you would go off and tell your friends about the lovely experience that you had. Believe it or not, that entity does not exist in its form today. And it's quite tragic if you think about it, and you ask yourself what has happened. And digital transformation and the way that business models have evolved is one of those examples that shows you the up-and-coming players like Amazon and other online retail shopping business models has revolutionized the traditional brick-and-mortar way of doing retail, and especially targeted retail. So that gives you one example. The other one is e-hailing services. If we look at the way that traditional transportation was done, led by one organization, stringent governance, owning fleets and fleets of inventory to transport people, that model has transformed where a company that's doing mass amounts of revenue in transportation doesn't own a single asset, but that's all due to digital technologies. Hopefully that gives you a good example of how the industry's transformed, and it can resonate with a lot of people that have seen these businesses sort of crumble and evolve into these new startups that have become unicorns.
Yeah, thanks, Abdul. I think last year really gave us an example of that, where we saw online retail booming during lockdown. So I think it's very much a reality for local business. So here's another question. What do you see as the risks of moving all of your applications into the public cloud too quickly, if you try to push the process?
That's another good question, and I think a lot of people are sitting on the fence at this point. There's something called a cloud-first approach. Do we put everything into the cloud that's brought in as a requirement? Do we just take whatever we've got and move that into the cloud and hopefully realize all these digital transformation benefits? Unfortunately, there are multiple considerations, especially companies that have been in existence for quite a while. Investments in existing technologies is a key consideration. The cost of running those technologies, regulations, how you traverse data, personal information. These are massive things that needs to be tabled before you're actually considering moving into the cloud. So definitely a phased approach is something that needs to be considered to mitigate risk and create the least disruption, but also being innovative. So the hybrid cloud model fits perfectly into ensuring that you can still run your business in its existing form, but also rapidly accelerate by adopting these new technologies and hopefully getting to a place where you're transforming and being remaining relevant and competitive.
Excellent. So here's a question, and this is actually a topic that that IDC has commented on a number of times as well, which is looking at hybrid cloud as a mix of private and public. What about multi-cloud? What about organizations who have applications in a whole range of platforms?
I think that's something that's also being highly considered. Previously, public cloud used to be not monopolized by specific players because they had a specific value proposition. And in its infancy, we talk about a lift and shift approach, and that is typically where cloud was born. Take what you've got as is and move it into the cloud. But as this entire digital on-demand ecosystem has evolved, and where R&D and huge expenditures been put into from the public hyperscalers, each hyperscaler started to provide a very niche offering and a service in the digital arena. And with the customer's requirements, they need to start considering what we call the concept of horses for courses. What actually adds the most value to your specific use case? And I don't like throwing names, but I'll just use the terminology hyperscaler A, B, and C. Each somebody might be good, extremely good in providing analytics because they might have a very good internet search engine that they use as a basis to provide the analytics capability, and that might be of something that's of interest to the customer. Another party might be very good at doing IoT and the collection of sensor information and modeling that into a specific dashboard, and you might want to go with that provider for that solution. So having a multi-cloud strategy provides the best of both worlds in terms of being able to consume what is relevant. And everybody's in competition with each other. So you will eventually get to a point where one provider leapfrogs the other and they provide more value. You need to have freedom of choice to consume value where it makes sense to your business.
Yeah, good point. So Abdul, we're going to have to move on now. Thanks so much for your comments there. Ladies and gents, I'd like to invite you once again to rate the sessions. Please do give us your feedback. Let us know what your thoughts are. It really is helpful to make sure that we deliver the right content to you in all of these events. Now it's time to move on to the fireside chat with our